as far as I can tell, the front runners are Trump, obviously, and then DeSantis, Ramaswamy, Haley, you, and Tim Scott. You guys look like you're all possible genuine contenders. Maybe somebody else will pop up as we move forward. The polls I looked at indicate that Trump's running at about 48 to 50%, DeSantis 12 to 16, Ramaswamy, he varies a lot, say between 6 and 12. You, Pence, and Scott somewhere between 3 and 7, and Nikki Haley at about 2 to 4. Now, there's a lot of variability in the polls, and I don't know how accurate those figures are, but you can kind of identify maybe who's going to be part of the actual slate. Now, you were quite close with Trump. You helped organize his campaigns. You headed the contingent that established his presidency to begin with. My understanding is that you became particularly skeptical of Trump as a consequence of his failure to fully accept the results of the 2020 election. So let's delve into the Trump issue a little bit. I think that's the right place to go next, and then talk about the other Republican contenders. Then I'd like to shift our attention, if we can, to the Biden scandal and the Biden presidency in general. It'd be a shame not to hit that. So maybe we could take about 7 minutes to address the Trump issue. I want to ask this question. You know, Trump has been pushing this notion that the election was stolen. And when I talk to my Democrat informants, they tell me that the evidence for that from a legal perspective is nil. And it's very difficult for me to evaluate that. But then I look at it from a broader perspective, and I think this is where Trump is a genius. And he's put his finger on something, which is that there were a lot of terrible shenanigans on the Democrat side of the universe during the last election. And I think the worst of those was the squelching of the Hunter Biden laptop story. That was really, to call that appalling is to barely say anything at all, because that laptop's quite the damn mess, and God only knows what the Bidens have been up to. And that story was squelched very conveniently in relationship to timing of the election, which was a very tight election. So Trump might be wrong that the election was stolen in a legal sense, but that doesn't mean he's wrong about it being stolen in a moral sense. And so that's complicated. And you worked very closely with Trump. And so I'd be more than happy to hear whatever you have to say in relationship to those questions.
Well, look, I was saying at the time that the Hunter Biden laptop should have been a story. But you know what, Jordan? There are unfair things perpetuated by the media against Republican candidates all the time. And we do have a media bias in our country. There is a liberal media bias. There's no question about that. And the problem, though, is when you're a Republican, you got to be tough enough to deal with it and not be a whining child. And my problem with Donald Trump is, now all of a sudden the problem is, well, because they suppressed the Hunter Biden laptop I lost. How about the fact that you monumentally botched certain elements of our response to COVID? How about the fact that your conduct while you were in office absolutely poisoned the well with millions of suburban women in this country who had voted for him in 2016 and found him to be an absolutely unacceptable alternative in 2020. I mean, you know, much of what we're talking about here was self-inflicted. And having been as close to him as I've been over all these years, I can tell you that there were many of us who were telling him that while he was in the midst of doing it. But he doesn't listen, Jordan. He doesn't take advice well. He is incredibly self-consumed and stubborn. And you know, much of what happened to him in 2020 could have been avoided if he had listened to lots of good advice, which was available to him and was being given to him, and he refused to accept it. And he has morphed this into, if his argument was the campaign was unfair, that's an argument that I think a lot of us could buy into. But he doesn't say that. I mean, if you look at a recent interview he had on Fox News with Brett Baer, and Brett asked him about those suburban women that he lost in 2020. And if he were the nominee, how would he get him back in 2024? His response was, I didn't lose in 2020. So I don't know what you're talking about. So
what do you think he did to lose those women?
His conduct, Jordan, his abrasiveness, his failures on the COVID front, and his failures to keep his promises. Look, this is a guy who said he was going to repeal and replace Obamacare. He had a Republican Congress. He didn't get it done. This is a guy who said he was going to balance the budget in 4 years. As preposterous as that promise was, he still did much worse. He added $6 trillion to the national debt in 4 years, the worst fiscal record in 4 years of any president in American history. He said he was going to build a wall across the entire border of Mexico and the United States, and that Mexico was going to pay for it. And instead, he built 52 miles of new wall in 4 years, and we haven't gotten our first peso from Mexico. He said he was going to drain the swamp, Jordan, and instead all he did was rearrange the swamp and make room for his own family. Jared Kushner and his daughter Ivanka, 6 months after he leaves the White House, gets $2 billion from the Saudis after he made Jared a central part of negotiations in the Middle East when he had two very capable secretaries of state in Rex Tillerson and Mike Pompeo. Why was he doing that? It's all part of the grift that allows him to spend $40 million of his own money that he raised from middle-class donors who thought they were donating to him to help him get reelected president on legal fees as a billionaire. He's not spending his own money. He's spending $100 donors' money. So I think all of those things became apparent during his time. And a lot of suburban women just said, sorry, we gave you the benefit of the doubt in 2016 because we didn't like Hillary Clinton and we thought you might actually drain the swamp and do the things you said, but you didn't do them. And in the process of not doing them, you also offended us in the way you conducted yourself as president on a personal level. And so they left. And I don't think any of that will change, Jordan, in 2024 if he's the nominee, because all he's doing is talking about the past. You don't hear him talk about the future. All he's doing is he's still litigating the 2020 race. He does that in 2024, which is what he's been doing so far. Joe Biden will get reelected, and that will be a calamity for this country to have a incapable 82-year-old president going to 86 with a completely incompetent vice president.
But I think instead we'll turn our attention to Biden. And so Vivek Ramaswamy tweeted out a few days ago something I thought was extremely ominous, which was his suspicions that the question of whether or not we're tangled up in the Ukraine war as a consequence of the Biden family's financial dealings has now been laid on the table. And as far as I can tell, there's been a pretty stunning series of revelations emerging out of the investigation into the Biden family that they have taken substantial amounts of money in a multitude of, under the protection of a multitude of different corporate entities from foreign actors in Ukraine and elsewhere. Something approximating $20 million is the story at the moment. And it's so shocking to me to see this unfold that it's simpler for me to believe that this is mostly mud throwing and muckraking on the Republican side. Now, I don't believe that it is, but I can certainly understand how it would be reassuring for people to believe that this is all smoke and no fire. Now, if Biden himself has been tangled up in the Biden family business dealings, which seems to me highly probable, given that I can't understand what other value Hunter Biden himself would bring to the table, then we have a scandal of a proportion in the White House that should make what's happening to Trump look like a sideshow, and yet that isn't happening. And so how are you reading these revelations about the Biden family financial dealings with particularly with foreign actors? And what do you think it entails?
Both of these families need to go, Jordan. Both the Trump family and the Biden family, who have placed themselves and their own personal and pecuniary interests ahead of the interests of the country. You know, look, $2 billion to Jared Kushner. For what exactly? his extraordinary investment acumen? You know, you could ask the same questions about Hunter Biden. What value is he bringing to the table, except for his relationship to his father? Now, I do think the Vivek stuff about that's why we're involved in Ukraine is laughable. We were involved in Ukraine well before Joe Biden ever got to the White House. Donald Trump was sending weapons to the Ukrainians. I don't think anybody thinks that that was based upon some pecuniary interest Donald Trump had. And our European allies are involved in this as well. So I think this is Vivek just being him and throwing that out there the same way he threw out that, you know, he doesn't think we know everything about 9/11 and the government hasn't told us everything. And then he had to backtrack significantly off of that post that he put up with one of the longest posts I've ever seen, trying to explain away an irresponsible comment. Let's get to the real point here. Both the Trump family and the Biden family have put their own pecuniary interests of their own families ahead of the interests of this country. And for Hunter Biden to have access to getting his father while he was vice president of the United States on the phone with these business folks, that's what he was selling. It wasn't the illusion of access, as some of the Democrats say. It was access. He got him on the phone to talk to these clients. And as a result, these clients paid him significant amounts of money. Now, whether the president, now President Biden, got some of that money or not, I think we should continue to investigate and find out. But my point to you is that when you've got Donald Trump Jr.'s fiance getting paid $60,000 in campaign money to give a 3-minute speech on January 6th, when you have campaign money donated by regular Americans paying $108,000 for Melania Trump's stylist, when you've got them paying $250,000 to refurbish his plane, there is examples of grift in both of these families that are breathtaking. And every bit of it should be investigated. That's why I was calling for a special counsel quite some time ago to investigate the entire Biden issue. I'm very disappointed that they appointed the guy who was obviously either completely incompetent or in the tank on the Hunter Biden plea so badly that a judge rejected the plea. But we should be investigating the Biden situation just as aggressively as we're investigating the Trump situation. And I'm tired of the whataboutism. It doesn't make Trump's stuff not troubling. His stuff is just as troubling as Biden's stuff. They both need to be looked at. And my view is that both of these families are past their sell-by date for leadership in this country. And we need to move on from both Trump and Biden. And by the way, 75% of the American people agree with that. They don't want a Trump-Biden race in November 24. So the Biden stuff is serious and it needs to be examined in every way, including whether the president, while he was vice president or during the period he was a private citizen, was profiting from what Hunter Biden was up to.